Hello and welcome to the ACM's Vault of Cult Festive special. Not saying just Christmas, because one of the films I'm talking about in this show is Hanukkah related. That's an Adam Sandler one, 8 Crazy Nights. If you've not heard the podcast before, I take a film that usually didn't do so well at the box office or critically, but a film I've grown up liking and shown it to usually one, but sometimes a few people who've not seen the film before to see a modern take on the film, whether they like it or whether I just like it because it was something from my past and I like it for nostalgia reasons. With this episode, it's going to be broken down into a couple of parts now, because there were several films I wanted to chat about, and when I'd done the initial chats, they were longer than I thought, so I don't want to have one of these like 2-3 hour long podcasts, so I'm going to break it down to at least 2 parts with 2 films in each part. But Christmas is soon upon us, so I'm hoping to get a second part out, but if not, part 2 will actually be next year, so that'll give you something, 12 months to look forward to it if it doesn't come out. But who knows? I'm recording this on it's the 14th of December, so really I've got 10 days, but we'll see. But, I keep saying the word but, I've got buts on the mind. And the 2 films we're going to talk about in this episode are from 1994, starring Steve Martin, Mixed Nuts. Very underrated Christmas movie, in my opinion. And as I just mentioned, Adam Sandler's animated classic, 8 Crazy Nights. Spoke to Andrew Stretton, who some of you may know from the Pookie G Players, local Ipswich-based duo, about that one. And that's James Rowe, who a lot of you will know from music. Recently interviewed him about his daytime job he works nights as well, at King Street Cinema in Ipswich. I interviewed him for another podcast I do called Faces of Suffolk, so there's a plug for that. Okay, so here's the first conversation about Mixed Nuts. Okay, so I'm here with Mr. Andrew Stratton, who's become a regular on the show, and we've only done a couple without you.
Yeah,
so,
well, it's scraping the barrel quite quickly there, I suspect.
But as it's Christmas or festive themed, you're a festive man, we thought. Get you on at least one of these. I reckon you will appear on here. This is the first one I'm recording, by the way, so if we reference other films and then it contradicts, this sort of thing happens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's all good. So Mixed Nuts, 1994 Steve Martin comedy, directed by and co-written by Nora Ephron. Have you even heard of this film before?
I'd heard of it, yeah, but never seen it.
Yeah, it's not one that pops up on TV much.
Yeah.
I rented it when it came out. I don't think it got a cinema release in this country.
Oh.
And it only made about 6 point something million at the cinema in America, I found out. Which, for 94, it still isn't great, is it?
That's mad when you think of, there's the people involved in it. But then, I've got an interest in both Nora Ephron and Steve Martin. I hadn't bothered to watch it, so...
There we go, yeah. We'll just sort of quick... This is going to be short, obviously, because we're doing a few films of this. Basic premise, it's Christmas Eve. It's Suicide Hotline, isn't it, they're working at?
Yeah,
and
good taste.
It's been... they're getting evicted, basically. Find out on Christmas Eve. Steve Martin, the main character, tries to hide it from the staff. There's other stuff going on, like there's a murderer in the town, a suicide strangler. And there's a Juliette Lewis is having a baby. She's very pregnant. And her boyfriend, Anthony LaPlange, is that his name?
Yeah.
He was in a lot of stuff, mainly TV stuff. I think he was in Sarah Married an Axe Murder as well. Oh. He's the boyfriend who's a wall artist, and he doesn't want to get a job, he just wants to be a wall artist.
Yeah.
And, so there's lots of characters. It's sort of a screwball comedy, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite it's not the film I was expecting it to be, based on when it was made, who's in it, and who made it.
Okay, well, what sort of thing was you expecting more?
I think I was expecting it more to be your mid-90s sentimental Steve Martin effort, kind of post-Father of the Bride, when he kind of sort of melded into a slightly different persona, I guess.
Okay, yeah, so more of a almost drama with a few jokes in.
Yeah, I think that's more what I was expecting. And I'd say it was more kind of like the screwball sort of thing. It was more like the sort of thing he'd done kind of 10 years earlier,
Yeah.
And initially watching it, looking at the fact that he's dyed his hair as well, I did kind of think, oh, is this an older film than I thought it was?
Yeah.
I thought it was quite interesting.
And around the same time, I mean, this was a couple of years later, he made Leap of Faith.
No.
And that's a drama. And he dyed his hair for that. And he also dyed his hair for Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. And all of these films bombed. And he said he will never dye his hair for a film again. The only film I can think of that was a hit where he does, it's only a cameo, is Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
So, I'll start with, did you actually like it?
Yes. Once I kind of eased into what the film actually was, I think I did like it more. There's sort of that sort of slightly, it's quite a sort of cynical comedy that is going on underneath it, which you might not expect given the basic premise of a man whose business is about to go under because he's being evicted on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
That sounds like your kind of classic sort of, kind of George Bailey sort of setting.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And you think, and Steve Martin's the sort of bloke who could play that kind of character quite well.
Yeah.
A sort of an innocent, kind of slightly bumbling man who is put under pressure and maybe then becomes more cynical and unpleasant and then has a bit of an arc. This film doesn't really do that.
No, he's kind of... He's a strange character in it because he's kind of likeable, and with his staff, he wants to treat them well. He doesn't want to find out... He likes them. He actually says at one point that the two members of staff he really loves, and he doesn't want to upset them. But he's kind of an arse to most other people.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and then... There's not that kind of classic Christmas film character arc to him at all. There's a bit of a kind of... Because they talk about how he's not good with people in person. He's only good on the phone when he's doing the suicide hotline. So that's sort of interesting. There's a bit of a... kind of... They resolve that as the film goes on a little bit.
Yeah.
But I almost like the fact that they just decided not to bother doing any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It does make the film a bit messy because there are moments where it seems to play into your kind of your sentimental, stereotypical Christmassy kind of thing without necessarily actually parodying it.
Yeah.
So it's a mixed bag, or it's some mixed nuts, I suppose.
But that's the thing is that no one sort of... It all sort of resolves itself by accident at the end.
Yes.
There's lots of Christmas music played all the way through it, and that's the Christmas sort of theme to it. But the general Christmas thing of the moral in a Christmas film just isn't there.
Yeah, which is funny. I don't know if that was a deliberate choice or if they just they just messed it up. I don't know. I'm assuming that it was a deliberate choice because, again, Nora Ephron, talented writer, knows what she's doing.
Well, the thing is a remake, so she wrote the script. Yeah, this is because you said about going into this film as a Steve Martin film, expecting something different. I certainly would as a Nora Ephron film.
Yes,
yeah. This was made. It might have been the next film she made. It was certainly the year after Sleepless in Seattle.
Yeah,
which was a massive hit. More of a romance than a comedy, even though it is a comedy.
Yeah.
And then she does this, and I reckon she must have really liked the original, which was it's called Santa Claus is a Stinker, the original one.
Oh right.
And that confused me, but then I think it's because the boyfriend character of Juliette Lewis at the end is dressed as Santa when he goes a bit mad. So
yes.
Maybe the original's... I haven't seen it. I should have done, but I just haven't in the years since I've seen this film. I first watched it would have been mid-90s when it came out on video. Just haven't thought to track down the film, but I think I haven't come across it. You know what I mean? If it had been on TV or whatever, I'd have definitely watched it.
So when was that then? Was that sort of back in your...
Well, that was 82.
Oh, okay. Was it a French one or something?
Yeah, French, yeah. So,
okay.
So I think...
Doing the Three Men and a Baby sort of thing then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe they've done... Because around that time, it was a few years after Three Men and a Baby, but you had My Father the Hero was remade, wasn't it?
Oh,
Gerard Depardieu. So, and it... if it was the sort of film... Maybe it influenced her, or that she grew up with it. So she felt passionate about it and wanted to remake it, and I think that
makes a lot more sense.
Yeah,
actually, that's bit of a game changer.
And and with the cast as well, because there's a lot of big names in it. Really, Madeleine Kahn is in it, who's great.
Yes,
I thought she was really good in it actually, but she's just doing her thing, and this is the trouble. A lot of the actors are just doing what they normally do.
Yeah.
Rob Reiner's in it as well.
Rob Reiner's wonderful.
Do you know he goes a bit Jerry Seinfeld by talking about women and pillows?
Yes,
was
absolute kind of
that was
hack observational comedy,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
But that was a bizarre scene.
Yeah, and there are some bizarre scenes. There's like a really crazy Madeline Kahn stuck in a lift scene.
That was great.
Yeah, and there's a lot of running gags as well, which I like a running gag in a film. As they keep referring to her, well, she's a widow, and they keep referring to her dead husband's sister. And
your dead sister's husband.
Yeah.
No, my dead husband's. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's the phone sex man who keeps ringing up.
Yes.
Which is, but I read on the cast, I hadn't noticed this before. One of the policemen who appear at the end, it's the same actor. So I don't know if it's an in-joke that the policeman is the one ringing up. It wasn't an actor I recognised, but I think it might be a little in-joke they've put in to make out that the policeman's the actual sex pet. Which is, sort of adds to the sort of... I used to watch this film quite regularly. I hadn't seen it for years, and when I rewatched it last Christmas, because I originally wanted to do this podcast last Christmas because of COVID, never got around to doing it because I couldn't meet up with people. It actually seemed quite dark to me. A lot of the humour is like, I don't know whether you'd do it now. And it's a 12 certificate, it's PG-13 in America. The whole is set around... There's a lot of jokes about people killing themselves.
Well, that's the thing. Steve Martin made the two best films about poor taste suicide. This and LA Story.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. Yeah. Not long after, actually.
Yeah, I think I thought LA Story was much older, which...
yes, 91 LA
yeah.
Story. And that didn't do very well either. And that's one I would like to do a podcast on. It is 25 years old, more than that, 27 years old now. But I can't help. I'm at that age where I do sort of laugh at the humour, but I shouldn't. Like the jokes about just clicking the button to get the phone work and they pull the trigger of a gun at the other end. It's sick, but I don't think that means it's not funny. No, yeah, but it's kind of like it's in the wrong film because that sort of humour you'd expect in a 15 certificate or an 18 certificate, but not so much in this, which is kind of. I think it's meant. This is another question: like, who is this film aimed at? I don't know. It's like, is it a family film or is it? It's not an adult comedy.
No, but it does feel like the films. A lot of the films that sort of come later. I suppose Sandler being the
that's something else I'm going to
almost it's sort of slight kind of passing of the baton. I suppose it feels more like the kind of films that he appeared in, kind of as you get to sort of mid to late 90s. Slightly, it's not quite there, but sort of slightly more cynical. Perhaps stupid.
Well, Adam Sandler, you mean? More sort of Big Daddy.
Yeah, kind of. It's got a bit. I think it is much better than a lot of those films, but it's tonally more like that than a lot of Steve Martin films, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's a hell of a lot of jokes in it.
Yes,
and it's like it is one of those. It's like. If you know the stand-up Tim Vine, there's so many jokes that if a joke or two doesn't work, it doesn't matter because there's one next.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what I like about the film. And there are a lot of, if you're not laughing, you're smiling a lot. And there's a lot of like unnecessary. They go into the vets. There's an unnecessary Steve Martin just falls over the counter for no reason.
Oh yeah,
there's things like that.
The physical comedy is actually good.
Yeah,
which I think a lot of films that come after perhaps not so much.
Steve
Martin, I don't think I'd quite appreciated how good at that sort of thing he is.
Yeah, he's
and some of the bits in this are they're up there with,
the physical side of his comedy, All of Me is one I'd recommend.
Yes,
have you seen that?
That's a great film.
And that's another film that kind of has aged, but it's probably a 12 now when it was a 15, so it's probably but it's 40 years old, more than that. So, but I mentioned Adam Sandler. Now, prior to this, I think he'd only done. He was in a cameo in Shakes the Clown. He was cameo in Coneheads.
Oh, of course.
And he was in the terrible Going Overboard, which no one wants to talk about. Don't watch that film. He didn't write that or have anything to do with it. It's shit. And this is coming from someone who actually likes Adam Sandler. I can't stand that film. And this is, I'd say, the most Sandler of Sandler roles. The first time you see him, he's walking about singing Christmas songs with headphones on in his silly voice, making up lyrics. It's kind of like the songs he used to sing on Saturday Night Live. Yeah. And there's not much of a character to him, but he is just... It's kind of like if someone was to spoof Adam Sandler, they'd do this.
Yeah.
And he's not in that much of it. one of the main characters, but he's sort of just there, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I think if he was in more of it, people would be annoyed by it, the character, if they didn't like Adam Sandler.
Yeah.
But he's kind of there as almost a sidekicky role for people.
And he does sort of slowly win me over, I must admit. Because initially I was, I'm not sure. But in the same way, I think the film won me over gradually.
Yeah.
As you sort of ease into it is, I'd say, more of a kind of screwball comedy.
Yeah.
In some ways, particularly the way the plot resolves. I won't sort of go into it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But it does feel a bit like kind of the screwball films, kind of the 30s and 40s. That kind of Philadelphia story, kind of everything kind of works out in the end, sort of thing. Yeah, it is a lot like that actually, which again isn't really what I was expecting to come out with, having learnt something.
But no, it's an out-and-out comedy, really, isn't it? And it's only about 95 minutes, something like that, which works for it. Mentioned there's a lot of characters in it. Did you notice who the rollerblading couple were who appear at the beginning and end?
I didn't know.
It's Parker Posey.
Oh, right.
And Jon Stewart.
That was Jon Stewart?
That was Jon Stewart, yeah.
Good grief.
And you've got Stephen Wright in it as one of the callers, the stand-up comedian, not the murderer. I'm trying to think who else. There's loads of people in it.
Jon Stewart.
Yeah, Jon Stewart. And there's a few other... is it Robert Klein, really well-known actor?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was there. And the bloke whose name I always get wrong, who is something we have to address, the transvestite character. What did you think of this?
Oh, yeah, Liev Schreiber.
Yeah.
That's how you say it.
Yeah.
I've not brilliantly well done. Perhaps not aged well is the way to put it.
Yeah, it's someone who rings up the studio, the office really.
Yeah.
Gets the address which they shouldn't give out. A male-sounding voice, and shows up, and it's a transvestite. Is that even the correct term now? It would have been.
Yeah, I think transvestite is or transgender. I don't really know.
Yeah, this was 94, so that's and is referred to in the film as that.
Yeah.
So we'll say that. Not meaning to offend anyone. It's kind of when I watched it a year ago, like, you couldn't do that now, and you probably couldn't. But it's people's initial reaction to the character being weary. Yeah. But they all do. They all try really hard to not mention anything, and Adam Sandler's character just doesn't care. And that's
which is actually nice good. And quite refreshing.
And there's a scene where we'll say he dances with Steve Martin, which is quite a comical scene, but Steve Martin's very weary.
Yeah.
The physical thing is well done, but it does appear a bit almost homophobic.
Yes.
I think, but the fact that he's trying to, and being and trying his hardest not to make anything of it, I suppose that's where the comedy comes from.
In some ways, perhaps the closest thing his character has to an arc is being accommodating on that.
But all the characters do. I just think it's executed a bit differently than would be done now.
Yes, it would. That character and the framing of that character in the context of the story would be very different if it was done now. There are individual scenes where there are sort of good interactions, but the whole kind of framework is one of pointing and laughing. Yeah,
because you're supposed to, when the reveal of who the character is, I think there's supposed to be a laugh there.
Yeah.
But then it does show, and it's meant to be funny, but it's how you're supposed to feel for the character. His family just being horrible.
Call him Arnold Schwarzenegger.
But it is just that they're all and you can see why he wants to get out. And so that's something that I think it's kind of hard to sort of word why it's wrong without because you know it's coming from a good place and it doesn't mean to be wrong.
Is it coming from a good place? I don't think it's coming from an outright malicious place, but
I think the fact that they almost take the character in and accept.
I suppose, yeah.
Because when I watched it a year ago, I didn't think that, and I thought, it's just being nasty.
Yeah.
But then when I rewatched it this time, they do. They take him in, and by the end of it, they're all getting on, and nothing's. The character's now got friends.
Yeah,
and good friends.
That's true enough.
So, but it's just a bit dated and wrong.
Yeah.
So it's not me sticking up for it, because before I went into it, because I do like this film, I grew up liking it, I was like, how am I gonna? I can't justify that.
Yeah.
But then when I watched it again, I'm like, well, I kind of think this is what they were trying to do with it.
Yeah. It'd be interesting. It's a shame that Nora Ephron's not around anymore, because it's something that, I mean, it's perhaps not a big enough film that it would come up in any sort of discussion, but it'd be interesting to hear what people involved in the making of the film would think of it now.
I think it's one of the reasons that often films that don't do so well, Christmas films, they get a lot of TV showings, and I think there's so much in this film for it to be on during the day without editing, and then with this, you couldn't cut this character out, and you can't get around the fact.
No, it's
so I think that, and it has. Times have changed. That sounds cliche, but they have.
Yeah.
So I think that's a major factor for why this film isn't shown much anymore.
Yes, I think that's a fair point. That.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think what else, because that was something that I thought we'd have tackled earlier. So yeah, but I mean Juliette Lewis as well. This was around the time of Natural Born Killers.
Yeah.
I mean that was mid-90s, wasn't it?
That's funny, because this film feels much older.
Yeah. But also it's a Christmas film, and it's shot in, is it Venice Beach?
Yeah.
And there's no, like, you know, every Christmas film seems to have snow, and they just don't care. It doesn't even look like it was filmed at Christmas. Wasn't.
But I suppose you don't get much snow out Venice Beach.
No, exactly. Yeah. But it's an interesting place for them to set it.
Yeah, that's yeah.
And who was the landlord?
Oh, it's Gary Shandling, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of, I mean, it is, so 27 years old, but a lot of the cast are no longer with us, or old, very old now. But it is, you sort of touched on it. I like the mixing of what was then the new breed of comedy actors and the old, and
it's worth watching for that alone. Yeah. Really, it's not a brilliant film, but it's an interesting. People should watch it if they have any sort of interest in comedy, I think.
Yeah. I find it funny.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Mostly funny. Good performances. Comedy performances. A lot of great physical humour. There's some good lines as well. It's a good mix of comedy.
Yeah.
What lets it down, I suppose, is just the plot. Really.
Yeah.
And there's a lot going on, and you almost get tired watching it. And I don't mean tired of the film. It's just fast-paced, and there's a lot of running about.
Yeah.
And it's like, an episode of Fawlty Towers is half an hour, and you're like...
And that's a bit much sometimes, yeah.
And this is an hour and a half. One thing I haven't mentioned, actually, is the leading lady in it is Rita Wilson.
Yes.
Do you know of Rita? She was in Sleepless in Seattle as Meg Ryan's friend.
Yeah.
In Volunteers in the 80s. She was in a fair few bits. She's the wife of Tom Hanks.
Oh yeah, that's who she is, isn't it?
So I think she's sort of overshadowed by that now, but I think she does a fine job in this. Yeah. Very likeable as she's sort of the sweet type character who gets angry, and it's done well. And it's out of the names in this, she's one of the lesser known.
Yeah. But
holds her own with these bigger names.
Yeah, it's just sort of slightly more understated than some of the performances, and that's not a bad thing. Yeah. And
the Steve Martin's initial girlfriend in it, who dumps him, is Joey Fisher, who was it Jolie or Joey Fisher, who was in Ellen and is in.
Oh, was that?
Yeah,
yeah.
She's Jim Carrey's original girlfriend in The Mask as well, made around the same time. So it's just a lot of these actors in it who it's almost like spotting the comic actor.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's, to sort of draw a slight parallel with a lot of the kind of British comedies of the 70s. If it's got everybody in it that you've heard of, it's probably not very good. It's probably slightly unfair, but.
And that's kind of. I mean, you get that a lot with. And I'd say the same for. People slate me for this, but films like Cannibal Run and that aren't that good. Yeah, and there's a lot of names in.
Yeah.
But I would say with the one of the reasons I think the Carry On films in British comedy are remembered is because even though they're considered quite bad, they're a lot better than the lot of the comedies without those two words in front.
Yes.
So it was, and I think they knew what they were doing with the Carry On films more than other film of that era.
Particularly often with people who were sort of venerated for their work more on TV, I guess, and then they'd move into films and it would just be a disaster.
Yeah,
So
Hancock, for example.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen the 2 Hancock films, but I've heard they're actually quite good.
Oh, right.
But it didn't work, and
yeah.
But yeah, you're right. And it's when you look at this film, actually, apart from Steve Martin, and it's before Adam Sandler was doing movies. He's the only big name film star in it. When you,
I suppose,
you look
yeah.
at it, and
It's all people who've kind of gone on to greater things.
Yeah, Madeline Kahn was never the star of a film. She was most well known for that Mel Brooks stuff, and
Sort of
but she's she's no longer with us, and what an underrated comedy actress. And I remember
that's a great performance.
Yeah, it is, and Mrs. Mishnick, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just great, and it reminded me of. She was on Saturday Night Live a few times in the 70s, and you see the clips of her on that. She's just in her element, just almost being the sort of bitchy, funny person who's very likeable.
Yeah.
And she's like that in Blazing Saddles. Is she in Young Frankenstein as well? She is, isn't she? She's Gene Wilder's girlfriend, who there's the scene where she won't kiss him. But she's an actress, isn't she? I don't think she don't come from stand-up. And a lot of the people in this film are like that. And like Rob Reiner's an actor, director and writer.
Yeah.
But obviously, Nora Ephron wrote When Harry Met Sally. Yeah. So I know they're from watching documentaries. They were good friends, and it's good to see him in this because of course he acted in he is in a few films, but most well known for acting in Spinal Tap.
Of course, yeah.
As the director. So yeah, I mean, I think I do find this film funny, but for me, the reason I like it is seeing all these good performances.
Yeah.
And I think what you said about the 70s films, it's not actually a bad film. It's just not an amazing one.
Yeah, but it's a film it's less than the sum of its parts, I would say. When you think of who's involved in it and all of that, and it looks like they spent a fair amount of money on it for the kind of comedy it is. I don't know, but
that's interesting because there's not that many locations in it when you think about it.
No, that's a fair point. Yeah,
and as for the cast, I think they're all mates and they're doing it. I imagine it was shot quite quickly. I reckon it's quite low budget.
No,
really.
maybe you're right. Yeah, perhaps I can't get over the cast who they are now.
Yeah,
and then when they were back in 1993, 94 or whenever.
I mean, it's like
it's a different story, I suppose. But when you think it's Nora Ephron, who by this point had won an Oscar for screenplay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
yeah.
I think this is a project that. Well, I'm trying to think of the word, but
passion project.
Passion project for her. It's a shame it didn't pay off. But looking at online at this, I haven't like viewers' reviews. I haven't seen any terrible ones. There's a lot of people
it's not terrible. Yeah. It's interesting, slightly baffling.
Yeah, I mean, it's IMDb. It's got 5.5, which I think is a bit low for what it is.
Yeah, perhaps a little harsh.
But it might be one of those that some people go into it expecting something else and don't go with it, and that's what you've got to do with this film.
It took me a good hour, really, I think, to adjust to what the film was doing, because I thought it was just not succeeding in what I was expecting it was going to be.
Yeah.
That sort of the slightly more sentimental end of Steve Martin and Nora Ephron, to be fair.
Yeah.
So once you kind of are at ease with the idea that it's not that and that it's a slightly surreal, cynical comedy that just kind of happens to be set at Christmas in a way.
Yeah. But that's the thing, because the DVD cover I've got here, which you can't see, but I'll put pictures up. It's Steve Martin's face, and then the character's sort of photoshopped underneath. Looks quite cheap, but I don't imagine that was the poster. But there's another, at least a video cover. He was wearing the same picture, him with a Christmas hat on. So I think they've tried to sell it twice as a Christmas film and not a Christmas film. It's set at Christmas, which by a lot of people's, that's why I've counted in this podcast. But it is a sort of film I think you could watch all year round.
Yeah,
it's that sort of thing that
Like Die Hard, isn't it?
Yeah, but this is a Christmas film. So I can see why they've done that, especially for a film that didn't do that well and they want to make some money. I don't know if it lost money. Probably. But did Nora Ephron go on to do, like, more or less a few years later, like You've Got Mail? She was behind that, wasn't she?
Oh, I think she must have been.
Yeah, she's done a lot, but if you look into her career, I think she wrote a lot more than she directed.
Yeah.
And that's what interests me with this, the fact that she directed it. I think it was a passion project, like you say.
Yeah.
But yeah, a rating out, if we do out of 5, do we normally?
I can't remember, is it 5 or is it 10?
Let's do 5, because it's easier.
I think it's a 3.
3, yeah.
It's a 2.5 that's perhaps elevated by the quality of performances. And if it didn't have such good people in it, perhaps it wouldn't quite work. But I mean, it's funny. There are relentless jokes,
and it is a comedy, so that does
it succeeds, I guess, in what it set out to do.
I'm going for you. You're going to have to say a 3 because you said 5.5 out of 10 was a bit harsh.
I didn't I? Yeah, no, I think a 3 is fair.
Yeah, and for me, but you got to think. I mean, listeners don't know this, but I am a massive Steve Martin fan. And it's one of those. It's not one of his better films, but it's certainly one you can rewatch more. I find because you notice different things and you watch different performances.
It's a film I think I could perhaps grow to like more.
Yeah. So for me, it's a solid 4.
Yeah.
And it's now 27 years old, and I said to you before we start recording, I've watched it 2 Christmases in a row because of podcasts. I feel no need to watch it next year, but in a few years' time I will be watching it again.
Yeah.
And it is one I like to say to people, well, have you seen this? If you're looking for a Christmas film, it's not the same old stuff. Because when it comes to Christmas films I like, the only 2 big ones, well, It's a Wonderful Life is a classic, but I tend to watch Scrooged and Christmas Vacation. But everyone's seen them.
Yeah.
So another reason for doing this podcast is to
raise awareness.
Yeah, it gets
and also you know, Gary Shandling's in it, and everyone needs to watch more Gary Shandling because he was amazing.
Yeah. Apparently not a very nice man, though.
Really?
Well, have you seen the Ricky Gervais thing with him?
No.
Is
that like the one he did with Larry David? That kind of thing. Oh.
Yeah, just the things said afterwards. But I don't know if it was, but it might be just you catch people on the wrong day, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because he was a very funny man. The Larry Sanders show was great.
In more than Iron Man 2.
Was he in Iron Man 2?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Who was he in that?
Some law guy or something. Yeah. I don't really understand that film.
Was that the one with Ben Kingsley in it?
No, that was Iron Man 3.
Because Ben Kingsley's great in that.
Yeah. But it'd be better if it was Gary Shandling.
Yeah. Right, so thank you very much for chatting about this.
Always a pleasure.
I know you might even be on one of the other films we talk about on this podcast.
Yeah. See how it goes, depends how desperate you get.
Yeah, so I'll speak to you in a minute then.
Right, so speak to you soon.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed that. This is just a filler bit. I don't normally do more than one film on one of these podcasts, so this is a little middle segment, which I should have some cheesy music playing in the background. If you want to get some popcorn, get it now. Available in the foyer, I'm guessing. Right, yeah, that was Mixed Nuts. Now, this is an interesting one, because usually I'm not sure whether people will enjoy the film or not, but with this one, with James, because I know him and his tastes, I'm glad he was willing to watch the film, but I did suspect he wouldn't like it. I wasn't really wrong on that, but he had some really interesting things to say and some really valid points, actually. So this is me chatting with James Rowe about 8 Crazy Nights. Okay, I'm here with James, who you may remember from the Mighty Peking Man podcast, or as the Mighty Peking King, as I kept calling it. We'll forget about that podcast and concentrate on this one. And this is why I called it Festive Films, because this is Adam Sandler's 8 Crazy Nights. They put his name at the beginning of it, I think, almost as a warning for people so you know what you're going to get. It's sold as a Hanukkah song, a Hanukkah film, because of the Hanukkah song, which it's loosely based on, which featured on 2 of Adam Sandler's albums were released prior to this movie. One of the main characters, Whitey, featured on the Stan and Judy Kid album, which I believe may have even been the last album he recorded, which many will say is a good thing. And that character also briefly featured in the movie Little Nicky, which wasn't a big hit but was a hit. Whereas this film, I think, was Adam Sandler's first box office failure after he'd built up to have hits.
Yeah.
He had he released Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, which kind of almost cult hits. Then The Wedding Singer came out.
Yeah, massive.
Huge. And then he had Big Daddy, The Waterboy.
Yeah, all
Little
of them.
Nicky.
They're all big.
The prime Sandler.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's how he ended up making the Happy Madison production company,
That's
which I
right.
think is just prior to this movie.
Yeah.
So he must have done well with some films, because this didn't do well at all. Released in 2002, was it, or 2003?
No, 2002 is correct. Yeah.
2002. It's IMDb. It's got 5.3, which
Right.
sounds fair. I mean, as in it's an average rating.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought it would have been lower than that, just because of the kind of people that leave reviews on that site.
well, looking at the reviews, most of them, and on Letterboxd as well, are 1 star. The people who've made the effort to write anything.
Yeah.
It's mainly 1 star reviews, and I think maybe the old cliche of Adam Sandler fans can't write. I consider myself an Adam Sandler fan, especially the prime era, because that was when this film came out, and this what this podcast is about. I would have been 20, 21.
Yeah. Me too.
So sort of growing up with Billy Madison and that sort of thing, which were films that as kids me and my mates loved. We didn't get cinema. They didn't get cinema releases in this country, or at least in Ipswich. This one did, and was actually the last film I saw at the old Odeon.
Yes.
Which is long gone. So that's been gone. Well, it's closed shortly after this film was released. For those who don't know, it's an animated movie as well, done by the guys who made the Iron Giant, and it really has that old-fashioned style. Well, now it's old-fashioned style, proper animation. All looks hand-drawn and stuff. Before the CGI stuff. Well, it wasn't. It was sort of in the era of CGI. And this.
Oh, so completely. Yeah.
And I think that could have been a good selling point for it. But the humour is very crude. It's a 12 certificate. I mean, I think if there was one F-bomb in it, it would definitely be a 15.
Yeah.
Its main fault, I think, is it's too crude. And I think the audience... you're thinking there's loads of fault.
No.
But the audience it's aimed at, that's, say, people... the teenage males under 25s.
Definitely.
Sort of the next generation American Pie audience, I'd say.
We are probably, at the time of its release, our age was probably about right, or just past, maybe.
Yeah.
Like if it had come out 3 years prior, 3 or 4 years prior, we probably would have been target audience, because I'd say teenage boys.
Yeah, I think Adam Sandler
16,
had that
17 sort of thing.
I mean, for those who weren't around in the era, he's always been Marmite, but he had that sort of 7-8 year period where he was picking the fans up.
Yeah.
He had 7 or 8 years where he was picking up teenage boys, let's say, which is a sort of joke he'd make. So, but I mean, if you look at films like Big Daddy, for instance, and later on Just Go With It, he attempted and even The Wedding Singer, but he got a lot of female fans through these films as well.
Yeah, well, he writes, especially with The Wedding Singer, because that's what I remember particularly well. It's got songs in it, and he writes these very sweet songs, which are also funny. Yeah. And you could sort of go, oh wow, he's a nice guy, sort of thing. Yeah. He does have that side to him, very much so. He always has done.
That childish side, almost.
Yeah, it's sort of almost an innocence, like I say, the jokes, the crude humour is kind of saved because of that, in a way, because it's almost like, well, he may be crude, but it's because he's a child. He doesn't know any better. Yeah. And
I think that's possibly true. I think the reason he got so successful is, and we've got to think this was early 2000s. We'd had was it Farrelly Brothers had loads of hits. Something About Mary, Dumb and Dumber, things like that, which isn't too far off what Sandler does, and
especially in this one. Yeah, in 8 Crazy Nights, especially.
Yeah. Can I just ask? I mean, you said you saw The Wedding Singer, and I assume you watched Big Daddy and films like that.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you didn't? So, did you make a conscious effort not to see this film at the time?
Right. So that sort of does go back to the thing mentioned about the age, because I think I just got to a point where I was like, I don't really care enough anymore to go see this. I think, okay, that's partially true, but I remember I was working as an usher in the cinema when Little Nicky was on, and I saw it, and I saw quite a bit of it, like bits and pieces of it, as just working in the cinema, as you do, as an usher back then. And I didn't particularly like it very much. And I didn't understand why he was doing this odd voice that I just found like, why are you doing that? And I thought the character in it was just not really what I wanted anymore. I didn't want that kind of I didn't find that character interesting. I didn't find it funny. And so I think that must have played a part in me just going, I can't be bothered with this new Adam Sandler film.
Do you think he almost got a bit... I don't just talk about Adam Sandler, but briefly. Do you think he just got a bit too big for his boots? He had these big hits, and he came from sketch comedy.
Yeah.
And to me, I like Little Nicky. I think that there's a lot of good things in it, and it's totally not the crude film this is.
Well, it's got loads of cameos with people, you know, with famous actors in it, and there are some funny moments in it, but I just didn't like the character of Little Nicky.
Because he comes from sketch humour. I think a character like that, and The Waterboy, which is basically a reimagining of a sketch from a few sketches from one of his albums. I think 90 minutes to 2 hours of this is a bit much. Whereas when he's doing the romantic comedy side, he's more playing a more human, more real character. So that way the film works better. Whereas Little Nicky, to me, was 2 hours, and it could have been a 5-minute sketch every other week on Saturday Night Live, and would have worked a lot better.
Sure, I agree with that.
And the silly voice thing, I still think is a throwback to... He probably grew up watching things like Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
But as a kid, my parents liked things like Norman Wisdom, that sort of thing, but they hated Jerry Lewis because of his silly voice.
Right.
And I think things like that...
It's good.
I think things like that are... It appeals to right youngsters. Oh, look at him. It's almost like a joke without having to do a joke. Because young people will be like, it's different, it's amusing.
Yes.
And this is a thing we have to touch on with the humour in this film. Should briefly go over the plot. It's Adam Sandler voices Davey, and it's drawn based on a picture of him when he was 19, apparently. Davey he lives in a small town. He drinks far too much. Should we say alcoholic? I don't know.
I would say, by the sounds of things, alcoholic. Yes.
Alcoholic, yeah. He just causes havoc. It's around the time of Hanukkah. He's getting in trouble for drunk and disorderly.
Yep.
He bumps into his ex. What did you say? Well, it's a female friend from when he's about 12.
Yes.
Who he's obviously had a thing for. She's now got a kid.
Yes.
And it's about him basically redeeming himself. But one thing I don't get is, has she moved back to the town, or have they just barely seen each other in this time?
Well, this is again another fascinating thing about the film, is that there are, of course, lots of holes in the plot generally, which is fine, because it's not about the plot, it's about a character needing to be redeemed and finding himself again, because he lost himself. The plot is ultimately that as a child he was a very happy-go-lucky child, he was great at playing basketball, everything seemed to be going really well for him, and then tragically his parents are killed in a car crash, and this turns him understandably into an unhappy, not very friendly, angry child.
Scrooge-esque character.
And that's really, like you go, that hits you, you go, right, you understand why he may have problems. But everything in this town, he's grown up in this one town, he's lived his whole entire life in this one town, everyone seems to know each other and be very close-knit. It's important, because it's a festive, film, it's about the holidays, it's set in a place where everyone knows each other, and everyone's close, or supposedly close, and yet they seem to just not care about him at all, bar one character, of course, who is Whitey.
Whitey, the questionably named Whitey.
Yes.
It's because he's got white hair, isn't it?
In very strange parts of his body.
And this is and Whitey's an old man. All we know is he's old.
Yes.
He's a basketball referee.
That's right.
He's short, so they can make jokes about that.
Very short. He has one foot bigger than the other.
Yeah.
Which is a very peculiar thing. I don't quite understand what they were trying to say with that.
Yeah.
He has a sister who is basically the female version of him.
With no hair and lots of wigs.
Yeah.
And more or less the same voice.
Yeah.
But all three of these are voiced by the multi-talented Adam Sandler.
Yeah. And you never would have guessed either.
No, it's like Rory Bremner. So this old fella who does odd jobs for people around the town, but everyone just takes the piss out of him.
Very much so. I mean, it's to the point of mean-spirited nastiness.
Yeah.
And you do think, what is going on in this tiny, clearly close-knit community town where they are, abusing an old man and getting away with it?
You could see that in a town like that. I mean, I'm from a small town. Maybe the little kids would make fun of this old man because that's what happens.
Yeah.
But the older people, anyone over 25, 30 would be like, they'd get him. They'd be like, oh, he's helping. He's not. Yeah. He's not one of those people. The character doesn't come across as that. When some people just busybodies.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, he's not one of those.
Not at all.
No, he just doesn't. There's a scene where he's holding an aerial on top of a TV.
Yeah.
So people can watch some sport. Okay, and they're like, oh, move to the left. And he gets an electric shock and it's hit by lightning, isn't it?
That's right.
They just don't care.
Yeah.
And I see where it is just going for joke after joke after joke.
Yeah.
Also in this podcast, I mentioned another film where Adam Sandler's in, but I wouldn't count it as Adam Sandler film, Mixed Nuts, where there's so many jokes in it that if one fails, the next one's funny. Whereas in this, you've got to think, I was fairly young when I watched this, and we were in that era.
Yeah.
It seemed like there was loads and loads and loads and loads of funny jokes. Whereas watching it more recently, I mean, I watched it last year when I was going to do this podcast, and I'm more or less using the same notes I made. But before that, it had been 5 years at least before I'd seen it, I reckon. Yeah. And it is a matter of times have changed, and I don't think this film was intentionally made to be nasty. It's kind of just poor writing.
This is Adam Sandler all over, though, for me at this point in my life, with my sort of history of watching his films and some of his more recent ones. That I don't think he's ever done anything to be horrible. I'm pretty sure he's probably a really lovely guy. It's just he has an idea of humour which I just find not to be generally very funny, and to me comes across. Maybe it's a cultural thing. Maybe I'm not an American, and maybe it is a very sort of. I think it is a very American style of humour. Yeah. Right. And I think I don't know. Maybe it just doesn't click with me, but I do find it quite offensive a lot of the time.
Well, there's certain things like being animated, and I think one of the reasons this film didn't do very well is the age of the people it was aimed at saw it as a younger person's film by just the design of it, the poster, and they were like, well, I'm not going to go and see that, he's made a kids film. And then 5 years later they all flocked to see Vampire Hotel or whatever it was called. Transylvania.
Yeah, Transylvania Hotel. Which is actually pretty good.
Yeah, he's less involved in the writing of that one, I think. Whereas that is a kids' film, and that done really well. So maybe he learnt from this before going on to do that, because I think that was produced by him and stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Yeah.
So I kind of go back to the humour side of it, like you say. Younger people who are watching, say, a 15-year-old who's the target market of this, when there's scenes in it of, they mentioned that one of the kids who plays basketball has just had a growth spurt. Yeah. He takes his top off and they're making fun of his hairy armpits. Yeah. It's the sort of thing you might giggle at as a child, but it's the sort of thing we should encourage people not to giggle at. Sure. Whereas this encourages people to.
Yeah, the jokes, all the jokes are designed for people to poke fun. Like you're supposed to, and again, like I say, the mean-spiritedness of it is probably just a misstep for them.
Well, I think it's supposed to show that these people are horrible, and then they redeem themselves.
But I don't understand how. You are right. That's clearly that's the finale of the film. Yeah. But I don't understand how that they get to that point. The fact that a drunk who's extremely unhappy, who clearly has not had any help with his emotional problems, the trauma that this guy has gone through his whole entire life. That he somehow, through spending, I'm guessing, 8 days with Whitey. I guess that's why they're calling it 8 Crazy Nights. Realizes the error of his ways, though I don't understand really. They're not really errors of his ways. He's become this because of trauma and living in a place where people generally don't care.
Yeah, this is with his character. It's the redeeming, in The Christmas Carol, a younger Scrooge was a nice guy.
That's right.
Or to modern that for us, Bill Murray was a nice in his 20s in the 80s one. Whereas Davy is in this, right?
Yeah.
But the town get redeemed by him, but they're not redeemed because they were never nice.
No, exactly.
So it's just a matter of he turns them. And one big thing I noticed the last time I watched it is it says that he goes from foster home to foster home. I assume in this town.
It has to be, doesn't it?
Yeah, unless he's been away and it isn't explained properly, and then he's come back recently. It doesn't explain that.
No.
But it's also a big, the system has failed type of, which isn't the sort of thing that you usually have in an Adam Sandler film.
No.
He's normally quite,
But none of this is properly touched on. It's just mentioned and then we move on.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's the whole problem with doing a story that has real big issues. Like, it's talking about really big things. This is a child, right? A 12-year-old boy who loses his parents tragically.
I do think that the scene the flashback when you find out about him losing his parents is quite well done.
Yeah.
And if the film had been more of that, more of the
tenderness, the tender side of that, the more emotional side put into that, instead of now Davy's grown up and he's a drunk and just is nasty and horrible to everyone.
Yeah, and it opens with a scene where he's pretty much humping a car.
That's right.
Which kind of gives you the whole what this film's going to be about. But I think underneath, or what it should be, there could be a nice sentimental. Family festive film. Well, they could have put a few crude jokes in.
Yeah, sure.
Which a lot of films, if you look at the sort of comedy I love, Dan Aykroyd films and Steve Martin films.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were like the scene I always use. I might have mentioned this in another podcast. In Planes, Trains and Automobiles, it's a 15 certificate. There's the odd swear word, the odd rude joke, and then there's that one scene where Steve Martin loses it and drops about 15 F-bombs in a row. That works because the rest of the film's quite clean. There's obviously a lot of humour, and then there's that one offensive bit, and that's funnier than being offensive all the way through.
But that's because the character's cracked.
Yeah.
The build-up, there has to be a build-up for him to get there. We have to go on this journey with him.
Yeah.
For us to get to this point where now the character is cracked and we understand that's happened. Chevy Chase does it as well.
Yeah.
In his movies. Where
the end of Vacation.
Yeah.
But the fact is that they could have said the F word a few times throughout the film, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And that's where it plays well.
Yeah.
And I mean, in this, there could have been slightly ruder jokes, and then if they want to do a big build-up and do one big poo joke, maybe. It's like in Bridesmaids, it's pretty much, there's that, isn't there?
There's one scene which is really... I mean, it's funny you mention that, because that was something I was thinking about after when I was thinking about the crudeness of 8 Crazy Nights and other movies that I've, other comedies that I really like Bridesmaids, and how there is some of that does exist in other films that I really like. But yeah, it's like, it's one part which is, in its own kind of thing, which is funny, but it doesn't taint the whole movie or anything.
But it's a strange thing. Like I say, this is a film that when it came out, I did like it. I still have a soft spot for it, if I'm honest. There's bits of it I do like. Some of the songs I like.
Yeah.
But to criticise some of the songs, when it gets sentimental, the songs even go rude.
Yeah. He can't help himself in this film. It's clearly they couldn't. I don't know if it's nervousness, like, we can't make this movie without it being really over the top.
Yeah.
But maybe that's because it's a animated film and he's like, right, I'm going to make an animated movie and I want it to be not like your typical animated film where it's like Christmassy and everything. It's got to be rude all the time.
Yeah.
Sort of.
But it's annoying, and I think it works. I rate this above, say, Sausage Party.
I haven't seen it.
Which... it's one I wouldn't even recommend to watch because it's bad. It's just bad.
Yeah.
And it could have been like a 3-minute, quite rude little cartoon, and you'd find it funny. But stretched over an hour and a half. Yeah. It's probably how a lot of people find this one.
Yeah.
But the likeable bits of it doesn't redeem the film for me, but it makes it enjoyable for me. And I do like with some of the songs, and when he's calmed down, some of the humour I do like.
Yeah.
But there's certain things that just stand out, and also laziness. The Rob Schneider narrating it.
Yeah.
We don't need a good film. Maybe an intro and an outro from someone. The intro's obviously it's a 75-minute film. That's, I don't know if you can hear that. That's the bad joke of the hum going off in the background. 75-minute film, so then you might need someone to just give the backstory.
Sure.
But they don't even do that properly. Like I say, we're questioning where he's been, what's happening. I mean, growing up with the Saturday Night Live, I do find it amusing to see an animated John Lovitz, I've got to be honest. Things like that work. But with this as well, it's not all. It's like some of his mates wouldn't be in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not all of them. Should we dwell on Rob Schneider?
Just briefly,
Yeah, I mean, that is offensive. Rob Schneider. Do you want to say about that? Because we mentioned it the other day.
He plays, one of the characters is Chinese waiter, I suppose, or owner of a Chinese restaurant. And ultimately we have just a terrible stereotypical accent, which it's difficult to hear now and not think, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, really, why are you doing this? Because, it's just, it's ancient. It's ancient.
It's 30 years after, say, Peter Sellers.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's, and I think they've done it. They think they can get away with it because it's animated.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's nothing. I don't think it's mean spirited. It's just lazy humour.
Yeah, it's just really lazy. It's just like, I mean, I say it's one. That didn't offend me the most by a long way. Like, there's stuff that's much more offensive than it. It's just, why are you doing it? Like, it's rubbish.
They want to get jokes in, but they haven't got many funny ones. And I think I like the songs. I like the animation. There's a few scenes, like I mentioned, mainly the ones when he's younger. One thing I will mention, I do think is quite real. The fact that he's this youngish man who's a bit of a dick, and the young son starts to like him and idolise him. I generally think that sort of thing happens and would happen.
Yeah,
they'd see this, and it's quite nice how he's aware of this. He likes to make the kid laugh and whatever, but he doesn't want him being like him.
Sure. Well, he doesn't like himself. In the first song, there is a line in it which is really important. This is stuff again. There's stuff that's really good there, and he's burying it under a load of nonsense because he clearly, not clearly, but he makes the point that he hates himself in the first song that he sings. And that's extremely important because, yes, drunk people who are constantly drinking, they are unhappy. Like, you don't drink every day, all day, like this character clearly is doing. He remains drunk pretty much through the whole entire film. Yeah. He's not a happy man.
No.
He's not. You know, he doesn't hate everybody else because he's a happy man.
Yeah. I've just thought as well, when I watched this film, not saying I was unhappy drinking every day, but I was certainly drinking a lot and not far off the age of this character. Which might be another reason why I liked it, because it might have been like, well, I can get hammered and be horrible to people, then I'll be alright in the end.
This is another thing that I thought about, because I've had my moments as well where I've just been drinking a lot, and not being very happy with myself and just being kind of angry and rah. And it's like, I recognise that. I recognise that character right there. Yeah. I've been like that.
That might be subconsciously one of the reasons I liked it. I think if I'm not even joking, it might be. So I do. It's such a wrong film, and I should almost say it shouldn't have been made. But I still do like bits of it. I've got like I said, I've got a real soft spot for it. But like I say, it feels newer than 19 years old to me.
Right.
But when I watch it now, I'm like, it's like a film made 10, 20 years before. Yeah. With some of the poking fun at people overweight.
Yes.
The most offensive thing for me in it, I think, and I knew at the time it was wrong. Whitey and his sister have seizures.
They have seizures.
No one cares, and they just laugh at it.
Yeah, it's played for laughs. They're having seizures, and it's played for laughs. That is the most
That's possibly the most offensive thing. Second most offensive thing in any Sandler film, apart from That's My Boy.
Oh yeah.
Which I won't even dwell on. What's offensive in that? But the reason I still will watch. There's only one Sandler film I haven't made it all the way through. I'll still watch his films because I do think he can be a genuinely funny, talented comedian. And when he gets it right, he does get it right, hence he's had so many big hits. Yeah. But when he gets it wrong, it's like he's just trying to make his old teenage self laugh. Yeah. And I think even teenagers now, hence he's not getting the cinema releases anymore, still makes lots of money through Netflix. Yeah. He's not picking up the younger fans, it's the older fans having a few beers when the kids have gone to bed, probably. So he sort of resorts back to where he knows it will work for the fans he's got. I think his career's better off doing the odd comedy, maybe trying or to mention Steve Martin again, when Steve Martin changed from being all slapsticky to Father of the Bride. Adam Sandler kind of tried that in the film I Turned Off, which I forget what it's called, with him and Chris Rock. I just didn't like the way it was shot. It was trying to be like Curb Your Enthusiasm, I thought.
I haven't seen that one.
They're both... one's the father of the bride, one's the father of the groom.
Oh, yeah.
So I think he's tried. But then he's done Uncut Gems recently, which done really well, critically acclaimed. And it's a film, another Marmite film for people. A lot of people I know found it too tense. But nobody can say he isn't good in it. Yeah,
sure. I mean, he's clearly... He's a good actor. And the same year, he can act. This is the point. He can actually act. The same year that 8 Crazy Nights comes out, the film that I think he was perfect for, and it's a great film, comes out, which is, I always say it wrong, is it Punch Drunk Love? Yeah, it's the same year as 8 Crazy Nights, pretty sure, 2002.
Oh my God.
And it's perfect. It's a perfect film for Adam Sandler. It is exactly the sort of thing Adam Sandler should be doing, playing a angry man who's complicated, you know, who's actually interesting, and he, you know, you go, ooh, what? This is actually a really interesting character. You know, he has it, and it shows that his life, the people in his life, are awful, and rightfully so. That we recognise them as being awful, and we feel sympathetic for him. Where in 8 Crazy Nights, even though everyone is awful, you just think, well, I don't care. I don't care about this town. I don't care about these people, because there's nothing given to you. It's just, they're just awful. They're just, you know, and we're all just pointing fun and laughing. Yeah,
I mean, it's I think the whole in a small town and him growing up, and he's trying to, I hate to say it, he's trying to be a bit It's a Wonderful Life, isn't it?
Completely.
and it's like, oh no, don't. I mean, I think he could make a great animated Christmas film if he'd done it. It's just ruined by the crudeness. And that's a few of the songs still really make me chuckle. And there's like weirdness, like Whitey doing a robot dance and things like that. And a little joke which is so obvious but made me laugh. Obviously he's the referee. There's a picture of him and his sister as a baby, and he's got the whistle in his mouth, and little things like that.
Yeah, it's great. Just nice, a little bit nice humour. Like you say, you can chuckle at.
But I think he in this film, with the songs, he's scared to have moments without what he thinks will be the belly laugh.
Yes, one crack up.
And it doesn't need so many, you know.
There's like, again, it's like the songs. They're really. He's good at writing songs. He's always been good. That's the first thing I think I knew about him. Like with the Hanukkah song, which he, you know, is very old now at this point. It's funny and it's nice. It's not crude. It's not mean. It's a sweet song and it's funny. Like that's what he should really be known only for doing. Because then in my opinion, he'd be great. But I think the term I used earlier. This is a prime example of someone in Hollywood getting too big for their boots. It's a vanity project. It tries to be a sweet, nice film, and it isn't. But for me, I'm going to do you usually do the ratings out of 5. It's still a 3 for me. It's just because of that era of humour. It's short. The song's nice. It looks great. Those are all
But if this film was done well, this would be definitely an Andy 5. You know, when you consider, for me, Wayne's World's a 5, for example.
But it's wanting to have all the things that you love. You know, humour, Christmas, or I just mentioned about Hanukkah. Okay, I just want to mention that I thought that it was going to be more about Hanukkah. And it wasn't in the end, which is fine, because I suppose they're trying to sell it more as a, you know, inclusive, which they do mention, which is lovely in it, that it is a town where there are, you know, people celebrating both holidays.
They mention the school at the beginning. They mention celebrate Christmas and everyone cheers. They say those celebrating Hanukkah, and you hear a little girl just go.
That's my favourite joke in the film, by the way. I really like that joke because it's sweet, because it's saying, we are including a Jewish community, but our Jewish community is small, because of course it is.
Yeah.
You know,
that's the only thing they're actually accepting about anything in this town.
Yeah, I like that. That was the only bit actually where I did actually go, that's funny. I pointed and went, that's funny.
Yeah. You stopped. So we wound it just in case. But did you say as well that you know someone who does watch this film every year?
Yeah, they watch it. They watch like they basically watch Christmas film. Where at Christmas time they watch like loads of Christmas films, and this is one of them that they watch every year. So they obviously love it.
Yeah,
you know, they obviously like it, and I'm not necessarily surprised. He's not the kind of person that you think, oh yeah, he likes crude humour, but I think just of the age, like probably similar to you, quite nostalgic type of thing.
Okay, yeah. When we turn it off, I'll ask you if I know him, but I won't want to shame him by saying his name on the podcast. But this is also one that, I mean, it's a 3 out of 5 for me, but if I was to watch this now, either not seeing it before, or to watch it as a non-Adam Sandler fan, so to speak. So let me say, I am an Adam Sandler fan, but I will say some of his films are now, one in particular I mentioned it earlier, That's My Boy, terrible, but when he's good, for me, it's like he's just a kid with lots of money and makes films.
Yeah, with his mates.
Yeah,
which isn't a bad thing. You know, like making films with your friends, that must be lovely. Like, I'm sure they have a great time.
But I think, even though he's doing that, I still think he thinks he's pushing boundaries.
Okay.
You know,
that's a bit egotistical to say at this point.
No, but I mean, with you know, with the what's going on in That's My Boy, the fact that he got away with it.
Oh right.
You know what I mean,
well,
that's where I think he's trying to
10
be.
years ago now, I think.
Well, I suppose, but he's trying to be edgy. That's what I mean by pushing back.
Trying, bloody hell! It's awful, isn't it?
Yeah. But then he'll do he hasn't so much. I quite like the Halloween one he done 2 years ago, where it's just set in a small town again, but it's just a throwback to his old films. Like Ben Stiller appears as the character from Happy Gilmore, and that's a 12 certificate without so much crude humour in it. It is like he's learned, to be honest. That reminded me more of an earnest film,
right?
So that sort of thing. But
I've seen that one. So.
I maybe give it a go after a few beers on Halloween. I don't know, but you know, so I can definitely see, and that's the point of this podcast, that if I'd have watched it now in 2021 and not seen it before, this would be a 1-star film for me. Yeah. Which I'm guessing it is for you.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Would you say it's his worst film?
It's no. That's My Boy. Out of the films that I've seen, I obviously haven't seen every Adam Sandler film. Out of all the ones I have seen, That's My Boy is certainly worse. I probably would, if I ever met him, I'd say, what were you thinking making that film?
Yeah.
That would probably be the first thing I'd say to him. So, but yeah, it's not too far off that.
Yeah. He for me, he's actually made one not as offensive as that, but less funny. He produced and co-wrote. Was it Bucky Larson?
Yeah, you mentioned that before to me. Yeah,
hideous, just not funny at all. The one time the one bit I chuckled in it, he travelled about on a bike, and it takes ages getting ready to bike and see his next friends. And then he just literally bikes next door. That's, for me, is the best joke in that whole film.
Okay.
You know, so you can imagine. But while I've got you, you mentioned you got a friend who watches a Christmas film every year. Are there Christmas films you watch every year or quite often? Are there any lesser known ones?
Recently Krampus. I've watched it every year since it's come out.
That's a good one.
I absolutely love it. So, yeah.
That one. And any from growing up that you still watch?
Not as much. I mean, Gremlins are still, that comes on, but that'll come on just any time of year, really, not necessarily Christmas. We're going to show Home Alone again. I haven't seen it in years, and I used to watch that a lot. And so I'm kind of looking forward to seeing that again. Yeah. But that's famous, aren't they? They're two very famous ones. I'm trying to think if there's anyone. No, not really.
But they're still free. And you mentioned two there, Home Alone and Gremlins.
Yeah, massive movies.
I sort of consider them a Christmas film, but they are films set at Christmas.
Sure.
But yeah, it's good for a film like that because every year people watch them. They must the DVD sales or streaming, whatever they make the money of, must really rocket every December, which probably makes more money than a film that's quite liked. Just you can watch any time.
Yeah,
so I think that's a good market thing, and that is personally why I think Die Hard suddenly become this Christmas film. They know they can make money out of it.
Maybe.
But just for people who are listening, just to mention, you work at King Street.
I
Cinema.
do, yes.
in case I didn't. So if this is out in time, because I've got to talk about a few more films.
Yeah, we got some Christmas movies coming up, so you know,
so
if anyone
check out the website. And
yeah, exactly.
Right, I better say thank you very much. Now this is it's been fun. I don't.
Yeah, it's good talking about. You know, it's always good to talk movies anyway, even if you don't like them. I think so. You know.
Yeah, so it wasn't 76 minutes of your life completely wasted.
There's never any minute of my life wasted.
Good man. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Big thank you to everyone who's listened, and of course to James and Andrew. This is part 1, as I said at the beginning of the podcast. Part 2 may come very, very soon. If not, it will be next December. There'll be another episode in a few weeks anyway, I'm hoping. I sort of do this when I can pin people down really to talk about the film, so I don't really say when there's going to be a new podcast. It's I just sort of drop it, as the modern term is, when I feel like it or when I can. But thanks a lot. Enjoy the holidays. If you do watch those 2 films, I hope you enjoy them. And back with you soon.